friends. Welcome to episode 24 of School Librarians United. I am your host, Amy Herman. This podcast is dedicated to the issues and challenges school librarians face every day. As a school librarian for 12 years and counting, I found myself asking the question, where is the podcast that will help me do my job? I wanted a podcast which addressed the nuts and bolts of running a successful library program. I don't claim to have the answers, but I hope that this is a platform to share resources and exchange ideas. Now is a perfect time to mention that the ideas expressed in this podcast are my own, or when appropriate, I cite my sources. So whether you are a novice or a veteran school librarian, this podcast has something for you. I would like to give a warm welcome to our new listeners from Missouri, as well as those in Australia and New Zealand. I also would like to reiterate my invitation to any listener who would like to contact me either through email at schoollibrariansunited@gmail.com or direct message me on Twitter. I would love to hear your feedback. I'm always looking for episode suggestions. Recording each week when I know I'm speaking directly to the issues which are relevant to our listening community makes this podcast more significant to our listeners. So include your mailing address and I'll be sure to send you a podcast sticker. I had some exciting news from a friend who's done something I've never considered attempting, and I mentioned her in a previous episode. I'd visited her library. She's resuscitating a dormant library. The old circulation program couldn't be revived or recovered, so she started from scratch. What would you do with a room full of books, some with spine labels, many without? Where would you begin? How would you prioritize such an undertaking? I learned this week that my friend had her soft opening. In very short time, she had entered 630 books into Destiny and started checking them out for the very first time any of these students had ever checked out books in this particular elementary school. This school is K through grade 2, 373 students, which made it a very focused collection. And I asked her, how did she prioritize which books she decided to circulate first? And my friend answered that she limited her checkout to the books that could easily be arranged in bins, much the way that books are arranged in classroom libraries. So she featured her paperback picture books and paperback series, and she will reveal the shelves which can be circulated once those shelves have been entered into Destiny. As they're entered, she'll open up that shelf for circulation, and it can be gradual. Lastly, my friend also said that she chose to do a table checkout because these students hadn't been visiting the library at all in the last couple of years, and I'm very familiar with table checkouts. This is how I used to do preschool checkout for years. The key is to keep this contained, and it helps you and the preschool teachers keep the kids confined to one area of the library. By limiting their choices and space, you'll keep your sanity. My 3- and 4-year-olds would get a story time and then check out each week. I'd rotate 2 tables with picture books and 2 tables with nonfiction. To help keep track, I'd feature areas of nonfiction, such as dinosaurs or insects, horses or outer space, and my picture books I'd feature by author, the A shelf, then the B shelf, then the C shelf. It is March, which means March is reading month, which means all of my schools are entering book fair season. As soon as these dates are announced, I have my plan book open and I'm referencing which days I'll need to relocate these classes. With few exceptions, the book fairs are set up in the library, and because the library is a planning period for teachers, I still have students. My lessons will have to take place in their classroom. I'm utilizing many of the traveling librarian strategies I mentioned in last week's episode. Some of us travel from building to building, and as I've often said, there's nothing special about specials taking place in the classroom. Kids not only miss out a book checkout, but they also miss an opportunity to transition, to take a bathroom break or a visit to the drinking fountain, and most importantly, that necessary movement to release some of that energy before they arrive in the library for our lesson. It's a treat to see the classrooms, to see their libraries and their reading spaces, and One benefit is I don't have to bring many supplies because the students already have them in their own classrooms. The inspiration for today's topic, there's a substitute in the library, what could possibly go wrong, is in no small part because I'm preparing to be gone for 3 days to attend and present at a conference. It happens to be the largest ed tech conference in Michigan called MACUL, Michigan Association for Computer Users in Learning. It's a nonprofit organization which was established in 1975 and dedicated to assisting in the education community through support, promotion, and leadership in the effective use of educational technology. So last year, while I was waiting for a session to begin, sitting at this conference, I considered what I would tell a first-timer to a conference of this scale. And really, the following tips and advice could be easily applied to any conference, especially one held over several days and in larger venues. First of all, what to wear? Comfortable layers. One of my friends says she looks forward to going to conferences because this is when she gets to wear her yoga pants all day long. I recommend having a fleece or a sweatshirt with you. The air conditioning is impossible to predict, and the room temperatures will vary drastically sometimes. What shoes do you wear? This was almost comical because I saw many individuals attending this particular conference wearing ballet flats. Now, we will cover miles during our sessions from one end of the venue to another. I saw individuals wearing sassy boots with 2-inch heels. Honestly, wear the shoes that you would when you teach all day. I highly recommend hiking boots. Sometimes I wear my Keens or my Doc Martens. I also have been known to wear running shoes. Anything that's comfortable when you're covering distances. I always make a point also to wear some spirit wear from my district. It really encourages networking as it gives the other attendees an idea of where and what you teach. It also makes you more approachable, I think. Take advantage of the coat check. This being March in Michigan, we can expect all sorts of weather. Bring some singles for tips, and you'll have plenty to carry throughout the day. The last thing you want to do is carry around a coat. And it really did surprise me. I stopped counting the number of people carrying their coats while they're trying to carry their bags from session to session unnecessarily. What do you carry? Well, ditch your purse. If you happen to carry a purse, skip it. Opt for a backpack, not an over-the-shoulder book bag, but a backpack. Your back will thank you. Keep your wallet and your essentials in a pocket of your backpack. The next piece of advice, and it seems kind of obvious, but you need to bring a laptop. Who are we kidding? If you bring a tablet or an iPad, I think you're going to find yourself fighting the size and the limitations because you're going to want to open tabs all day long and explore resources. Bring a battery pack and some charging cords. It's going to be a long day. The conference app is your lifeline and your maps and your schedule of sessions, which you may need to revise from time to time. You're going to want to have an available battery pack with you. And many of these venues have become more and more accommodating with available outlets and charging stations. But tech conferences tend to look a lot like airport terminals with folks huddled around random outlets along the corridors, so you can charge while you walk. I would also recommend you have a QR reader on your smartphone. Many sessions these days have QR links for easy access. This sounds like I'm going into survivalist mode, but I also basically plan to carry all of my food. I carry a lot of portable things, such as apples, bananas, protein bars, some trail mix. My conference, the one I've usually attended, has on-site food courts or options within walking distance, but you may find yourself crunched for time and also trying to perhaps respond to work emails or visiting the expo, and this doesn't always leave a lot of time for a sit-down lunch. Additionally, some of the conferences I've attended, for whatever reason, they ran out of lunch options, leaving many attendees very frustrated and very hungry. Always bring your own refillable water bottle. Many conferences are now going green, and they've done away with plastic water bottles in lieu of water dispensers, which are scattered throughout the conference area. And lastly, remember to always pick at least 2 sessions for each of these time slots. And if you happen to miss a session, oftentimes the conference app will have links to all the resources available to anyone to download for several weeks after the conference ends. On February 27th of this year, Margaret Sullivan posted an article on AASL's Knowledge Quest titled, Your PLN, Source of Inspiration or Thief of Joy. I've attached a link in the show notes. Margaret is a high school librarian and a past president of the Missouri Association of School Librarians. You can connect with her on Twitter at mm_Sullivan. I could identify instantly with so many of the issues raised that I reached out to Margaret and I asked her if I could feature her article in today's episode. All of us can relate to the compare and despair, similar to the FOMO, which results from spending any amount of time on social media, whether studying our friends or our coworkers or complete strangers' posts. It's impossible not to see something which fills us in with envy. I have become accustomed to helping my 3 teenagers work through some of these feelings when their classmates post images of their exotic vacations, their 10 college offers, concerts or parties they attended, or the brand name jackets and shoes which cost more than a dishwasher I just purchased. I hadn't realized that I could experience those same feelings when finding myself admiring a rock star librarian and their accomplishments, leaving me feeling woefully inadequate. Margaret reminds us, quote, each school has its own culture and needs. As librarians, our goal must be to support the needs of our patrons and the goals of our school. A successful library program that addresses a need at one school might not be necessary or successful at another school. Yet I have moments when I compare myself to other librarians and feel inferior, end quote. I find this comment so reassuring. The mistake we make is that we all too often are comparing apples to oranges, my library assignment to somebody else's. The fact is that all school libraries are differently configured, differently funded, have particular schedules, demands of space, and challenges, which each school librarian must tackle. Margaret offered suggestions which should help because in admiring these rock star librarians' Twitter posts, blogs, and Instagram feeds, we are forgetting our own achievements, our own victories. There are 3 takeaways I wanted to share from Margaret's article. Number 1, quote, what's important is that you are making a difference for the students you serve, end quote. Number 2, give yourself credit for your successes, even the ones that seem ordinary or insignificant, end quote. And finally, number 3, quote, the ideas you learn about from your PLN are like entrees. You can't tackle all of them at once, so choose one inspiring idea. I really would like to thank Margaret for writing this and reminding us of these ideas. If I may insert myself at this junction, I make no secret that this podcast isn't about broadcasting my successes, it's really more about sharing my mistakes. I learn from my mistakes, and the hope is possibly that some rookie or library student listening today will avoid making the same ones. Thinking about the rock star librarians I envy, I'd like to mention 2 that I admire for very different reasons. There's a good possibility you've read some of Elizabeth Hutchinson's articles on Twitter. I enjoy her writing so much. I asked her if I could mention her today. With over 15 years of experience working in school librarians, Elizabeth is a chartered librarian and a fellow of, and I will spell this out, CILIP, which for those of us who don't know stands for Chartered Institute of Library and Information Professionals. And among her many accolades, Elizabeth is working on the hashtag Great School Libraries campaign. She speaks at conferences, nationally and internationally, about the importance of school librarians and good school libraries, demonstrating how they can impact student learning and enhance teaching. You can find Elizabeth on Twitter at ElizabethUTCH. This past week, Elizabeth posted a rather thought-provoking piece on her blog titled, School Librarians, a Reflection, Can We Really Be All Things to Everyone? I'll attach a link to her blog in the show notes. She laments that if she doesn't respond to a teacher's email request, because she's unavailable, she misses the opportunity to connect with the teacher. She says, quote, "It only takes one missed email, and I have to start all over again, reminding them that I am here to help." End quote. I have felt this sense of futility. We school librarians spend so much time and energy convincing our school staff and administration that we are relevant and we play an essential role in our students' academic achievement and in their journeys as readers. We are constantly reminding our staff through our actions that while our libraries are a tremendous resource to the school community, the school librarian is also a resource. Elizabeth raised the issue of the many roles we play, and that this list seems to grow, and she says, quote, "How can we possibly do it all?" End quote. Elizabeth reminds us, quote, "Each school is individual. Each school expects or wants and needs something different from each of our librarians, and each librarian has a different skill set." End quote. Perhaps the most empowering statement I wish to share is that Elizabeth states, quote, "We are very lucky that we can, on the whole, create the job we want in each school. This is because very few schools really understand our role, but this can be a curse as well as a perfect situation for some of us." End quote. We are reminded that we can, by our actions and relationship building, accommodate our role as school librarians to be exactly what our building needs, what our staff needs, and what our students need. A second rock star I'd like to feature today in this episode is Mike Rawls, spelled Rawls, aka The Book Wrangler. His blog is The Book Wrangler, Wrangling Up the Best in Children's Literature. I'll include a link in the show notes. I highly recommend you consider following Mike on Twitter at WranglerMike77. I can't say enough nice things about Mike and his blog. Talk about feeling woefully inadequate. Spend 5 minutes on Mike's blog and you will see his library and all he does with his students that is jaw-droppingly phenomenal. His displays are creative and colorful, engaging, and oftentimes available to download and replicate. What is most helpful are the photographs of his projects and the lessons that we can modify his originals to suit our own library spaces. His book reviews give us not just a summary, but how Mike incorporates the lesson suggestions and what has worked when he teaches that particular book. I'm going to take Margaret's advice and be very selective in deciding which of Mike's ideas I'd like to implement first. And now, the focus of today's episode, there's a substitute in the library. What could possibly go wrong? I am guilty of referring to my library as the biggest classroom in the school. I am usually saying this to a squirrely bunch of children who, on occasion, and especially as we enter this last quarter of the school year, seem to treat my library like a recess with wooden furniture. In saying that the library is a classroom, I'm reminding them that the same expectations of classroom behavior exist because they have left one classroom for another. We are not recess, gym, or the lunchroom, but rather the biggest classroom in the building. But in doing so, in calling the library just another classroom in the school, is a misrepresentation and does a disservice to the library and just how unlike a traditional classroom the library really is. This could not be more apparent than when confronted with the complexities involved when leaving the library in the hands of a substitute, or as we oftentimes say, guest teacher. I'll be doing just that at the end of next week. I'll be attending the largest annual EdTech conference in the state of Michigan. I know I'm not alone when I say this, but I'll admit I went to great lengths never to take a day off from work. In my very first library, I was a solo librarian. I worked without an assistant. So when I first contemplated taking a day off to attend a conference or stay home with my sick children, I was told rather abruptly that I would have a sub, but no book checkout. No book checkout for upwards of 200 students, 7 classes averaging 25 students checking out 2 to 3 books each. How could I possibly justify being gone? I asked if I was permitted to leave instructions for my sub to use our circulation software, which was Destiny. I was allowed, but I would have to try to explain how to run the circulation software. And there were so many things that could possibly go wrong. It just wasn't worth it. Consequently, for the first 5 years I was in my library, I almost never took a day off. I never attended a conference. I went to work sick. I was that person. I hired my brother to babysit my kids when they were sick. And I'm just going to tell you, for so many reasons, this is a bad idea. Working when you're sick, never taking a day off for yourself to be home or be with your kids when they're sick, never going to a conference to refresh and get energized with new ideas and inspiration, it just leads to burnout, resentment. And I finally made the decision that I was going to take a day off to leave my library in the hands of a substitute teacher. I spent hours writing great lesson plans, which, in hindsight, I realize may or may not be followed. When I left what I thought were very, very precise directions for checking out books, I was hoping for the best and expecting the worst. If I was lucky, one of my parent volunteers could check the books in before the classes arrived at 9 a.m. Once, the books didn't get checked in, my parent volunteer was unavailable, and a very well-intentioned sub reshelved 3 classes worth of books, in this case 90 books approximately, back onto the shelf, and I had to track down those books because they never were checked in. They were still checked out to all of those students. Once, and this was with Destiny, I have no idea how this happened, 185 books were checked out to a single second grader. The first student in line, every book checked out to that class was to this one student. It took me months to resolve this issue. Barring any of these catastrophes, you still will have to deal with the mess when you return. On the one hand, if you have a favorite sub, you have to ask yourself, how many days are you taking off that you have a favorite sub? And, a lot of this does have to do with whether or not you teach a flexible schedule versus a fixed schedule. I have always been very envious of my friends who teach a flexible schedule. They simply reschedule the classes, which typically come in for instruction, and oftentimes a clerk will run the checkout. I've always worked a fixed schedule, teaching these days 6 classes a day, and I have to create lesson plans, and I've been told, I'll be honest, by my subs that I leave wonderful lesson plans. So I'd like to end this episode with a bunch of tips and tricks that I've used over the years that have proven to be very helpful when I leave sub-lesson plans. First of all, I do use planbook.com, and I print these out when I leave, and I include copies not only with, in this case, I have an assistant, but also copies with my sub, and I will oftentimes email that plan book copy to my sub directly. The nice thing about Planbook is it includes the grade level, the start and the end times. And as I mentioned last week in my traveling librarian episode, planbook.com is a lifesaver. I don't have a sponsorship with them, but I've been using them since 2012. I did ask if I could offer my listeners a 6-month free trial. It costs $12 a year if you purchase several years at a time. And the 6-month free trial, the access code is free6SLU. It's a fully customizable online plan book with an integrated smartphone app. Each class's work, furthermore, I put into a folder with a corresponding seating chart with color school photos stapled on the front of the folder. I also make sure to leave the names of 2 to 3 helpers. These are students who can be trusted if the sub has a question. I let my building neighbors know that I'm going to be out of the library, and oftentimes they'll check in for you and make sure that your sub has what they need. I always leave my telephone number, and I ask the guest teacher to text me with questions. And on occasion, they will, and one simple response from me is all it takes for them to move forward with the lesson plans I've left them. Another piece of advice is to overplan. Expect that some kids are going to fly through whatever it is you've left for the sub to do with them. I have included in the show notes something that I call filler questions and wheel. Feel free to make a copy. These are fun questions which I have used to eat up some time when I have a few minutes. You can either use a printout of this sheet and have the students answer this in sort of a back and forth discussion with the guest teacher, or if you provide a link, the sub can use the internet access to spin the wheel and the kids enjoy going up to the board and answering the questions. I also make sure I communicate with the teachers whose classes are going to be affected when I'm out. If they know I have a guest teacher, a lot of times before those classes come up to the library, those teachers will have a conversation with their students, giving them an idea of what kind of behavior is expected in the library. I would like to thank you for listening today. And just a reminder, if you email the podcast at schoollibrariansunited@gmail.com or direct message me on Twitter, include your mailing address and some suggestions for upcoming podcast episodes, and I'll be sure to send you a sticker. I would like to let you also know that I am taking next week off to prepare for my presentation at McCall. You can expect my next episode to be available on March 25th. I hope you will join me then.